A walk with. Walk around Erie Veg and Glen Helen with Doug Allan.
Hello, welcome to this week's Walk With, and again, rather like last week, it sounds like we're in the same spot, doesn't it, with some cars just going past behind us there, but I promise you we're not. We don't make these programmes up in the studio, honestly. But yes, we are quite close to the road, but we've come out west this time, and we're pretty much in the middle of the island, just down by Glen Helen, and come down to meet a man here who we've heard on Mike's radio before when he had his happy retirement, I think. Was it, Doug, when you were quitting as your days in forestry? And this is Doug Allan.
That's right, that's last April, about 9 months ago now.
So experienced retiree now.
Growing into it, I would say. Yes, it's been an experience, I suppose, as most retired people will find out, and those that are going to us, it's pleasurable. It's pleasurable.
Sounds like a good idea to me, but the secret is, as a lot of people who have retired say, is to keep active, and nothing better really if you live somewhere as attractive as the Isle of Man as getting out and having a nice walk.
Indeed. Certainly, you look round the island and no matter where you go or start from, there's walks of all sorts of lengths, and obviously you have different interests. And I think probably the forestry division holds well in excess of what we used to call 26,000 acres of hill land,
still do, yeah.
6,000 acres of forestry and bits and pieces of glens. So basically is the biggest landowner on the island, or the government department responsible for the biggest area of land. They hold potentially some of the best walking country in the island.
Beautiful. So we're here now in the car park to Glen Helen, with the Glen Helen itself and the Swiss chalet a bit further up the glen. But we were saying just as I was about to set off that this used to be the Glen Helen itself, really, where we were.
Yeah, indeed. The car park as it exists now is probably about twice as big as it was originally. And as you look sort of thing from the north side to the south side, we'd be looking across originally at the original Glen Helen Hotel, which was certainly in its prime at the turn of the last century. Well, the last century to me is the early 1900s.
Absolutely.
It was a substantial building, virtually of German or Austrian type design, with pointed turrets and such like. And it was a very popular spot. It was probably the centre of Victorian entertainment in this area of the island, and indeed further down the road you had the likes of Glenmore, Mulcreasts were up until a few years ago, Mulcranes, and of course they had a tea room there, and further just down the road from the glen itself on the bank there was Brew's Cafe, and certainly in holiday times this was one of the honeypots, as they describe them now, I believe, for tourists on the island and for local people as well, because you had the area itself with the hotel, and more recently what is the hotel now, as they call it, which certainly originally was called the Ballroom, and out beyond that the lawned area, which when Marsden set up the glen itself in the mid-1850s was a place of leisure, if you like, in the sense that there was a bandstand at each end of it, and people obviously came here to be entertained. They came out of Douglas in traps and landaus and things, and indeed crossing the car park is a little area known as Caine, where the horses were stabled during the day before they went back to Douglas. Of course, when the Forestry Division took over the area in the 1950s, part of the glen in the area of the Swiss Chalet and the lawned area, it had indeed had been for several years a zoo, and there were deer and things like that. And when the Forestry Board, as it was then, took over, they also took over the guy, a fellow called Albert Taylor, Abba, who was looking after the animals still, and he was supposed to have taken the chimpanzee home to live with him. So how true that was, I don't really know, but that was certainly supposed to be the tale. Now, which one of the two of them came to work was another tale.
No one would know. What a thought, what a thought. So where are we heading now? We're heading down?
Well, we're going to go across the area which was the original hotel to a little bridge that leads down across the river to Caine itself. The hotel certainly met its demise, if you like, by the fact that there's a little stream comes down from Sarah's cottage, goes through or under the car park as it is now, and flows into the river, again just above the replica of the Menai Bridge, which we'll see when we cross over. Now that stream actually flowed through the lower area of the hotel itself, and that was the cooling, if you like, for the beers and the wines. But what they reckoned was that the dampness from the stream affected the wood within the construction of the hotel, and eventually the hotel fell into disrepair and became unsafe. And finally, over a couple of stages, the whole lot was eventually felled and infilled to create the car park, which we see now to a degree. But there was a stage in between where they originally filled it in, and a gentleman was parking a lorry here one day, and he walked round the back of the lorry to supposedly inspect the back of the lorry, and noticed his back wheel was sitting above a hole. So he contacted the Forestry Division, and I came up here to inspect this hole, which was about 2 foot across, with a bamboo, and I poked the bamboo and it went down 6 foot, and I thought, well, it could be a bit dodgy. So we got Stephen Christian from Bagarrow, and he came down with the JCB, and he sat beside this hole, put the bucket into the hole to explore, and an area about the size of a good room dropped 14 foot straight down. And what had happened was, when they had demolished the hotel, all the timbers had crisscrossed, and they just built up on top of that to form virtually what was a platform. And the timbers had rotted further, and of course the whole lot collapsed, so it had to be redug out and refilled. So
amazing.
The lorry driver had a bit of a lucky escape, really.
Yes, I think he did. I think
Anyway.
he would, wouldn't he? Anyway,
Yeah.
lead on. We shall march on down. Better get going while this time of the year we still have to make the most of the light, as they say. So we'll move on.
This little bridge that leads out across from the car park itself, across to the river, has always been a wooden structure up until about 2 years ago, when it was renewed and the timbers replaced with steel girders. It's an essential part, actually, of the TT setup, in that if there's an accident on the course at Glen Helen, or indeed further up the road, somebody can be carried down across the bridge and out across past Caine down to the fields below where the helicopter can land. So it's quite an important little bridge in itself.
Yes, you see, you wouldn't know that, would you? See, I didn't know that, for example. The things you find out on these walks. TT has fingers reaching to all areas of life. This is always a lovely old house. You see, I drive past this every day, and
Yes, this is Caine, or the Jewel. If you look back, sort of again 100 years ago, This is obviously part and parcel of the trade of the Glen would be postcards. And the sort of typical postcard showed the glens themselves, but one of them actually shows Caine House, and it must have been quite a modern design in those days, because it's still, fairly modern compared to a lot of the other properties around the area.
Absolutely.
And just out to the right of the house itself are some old stone buildings, which were more extensive than what they obviously are at the present moment. And these were the stables for the horses that came with the as we said before, the carriages and such like from Douglas. They would come out from Douglas, spend a day here, and then again return at night. We ourselves are stood on what is one end of a replica of the Menai Bridge.
No, you wouldn't know that, would you?
This again was part of the setup of the Glen that Marsden created, and indeed if you look at the top of the two centre pillars you can actually see the holes where the original chains went through, from which the supports were dropped down to support the platform of the bridge itself. In those days the bridge again was a wooden bridge with wooden runners underneath, and then I think it was about the late 1970s there'd been a period of time when the army engineers were coming to the island and doing various exercises, and I think it was a relief from Northern Ireland and places like that, and they would do a job for you if you supplied the materials, and they then gainfully gained experience in say constructing, as in this case, a bridge. So the forestry division supplied the metal girders, they did the metal work, slung the girders across and all the rest of it, and then our own gang, the lands department in those days, Donald Fairburn, they then clad the bridge with the decking, etc. But I was a bit like Peter Kelly really. I came here earlier and I thought I shall inspect the site before we walk here because I wanted to see the plaque, which I was convinced was here, that said which regiment it was that had did it. And I can't find the plaque.
Someone's pinched it.
Yeah, well, it's either that or time plays tricks with the imagination.
Well, that's the other option. Although the joy of this programme is if it is still somewhere around or someone has removed it, you can guarantee someone will write in or text in or email in to let us know.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's in the record somewhere, and I've probably got a photograph of it myself, but it certainly isn't here at the moment.
Oh, that's a shame. That's a shame. But the bridge and the pillars still are, so...
Yes, indeed.
They are.
And it's an essential part of forestry operations in that this is the only access in and out of Airy Veg plantation itself, so it is essential still.
It is. It's not just for decoration, it's still used, so there we go. And the pillars look like they've got another 100 years in them yet. Right. So I'm going to trace back, head towards the track and head up towards the plantation.
Just behind the house itself there's a pit, and if one looks at the old postcards which showed the area as being treeless and bare, there was actually a shaft here, and again further down the road towards Blig there was another one, so there was obviously again mining, as there was in most of the glens really. I think it was a case of they tried these pits, and if they found ore in sufficient quantity or quality they mined, but obviously if they didn't they abandoned them, which led to obviously the main concentration being Glen Rushen and Foxdale. But as I say, virtually every glen has got shafts. It's always better to start sort of 40 or 50 or even 100 foot below the surrounding countryside, isn't it, than have to dig down that
Get down all that way in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they were quite sensible, but I don't think there was ever anything greatly extracted from here. The one further down the valley, it did in fact have a little track to it, which I'm told ran a little bogie sort of railway thing, so they must have taken ore out there. But I would presume, again, it would be the usual lead and things like that. But certainly if there was much done here, I think it was very short-lived.
Yes, never really became a major operation. Okay, right, thank you very much. We'll go past the gate here. Yes, you can see the pit looking in there. It is amazing, isn't it, how they've tucked away some of these things. You need to get out and get your boots on and go and see them. Well, listen how quiet it is up here once you get away from the road. A bit further up the track now, and into the plantation. And that's what I always like walking in plantations. You get into the middle of a plantation on a track or a path, and listen. Virtual complete silence. Wonderful, isn't it? But here we are, there's another little fork here which we've just paused at briefly. I'm out of breath. Doug's still going strong, he hasn't even noticed yet. But there's a fork here, one sort of going down, as it were, snaking back down, heading towards the road and sloping away from us. The other one carrying further up now. We're probably going to take the high road, as they say.
We will indeed. But if we were to have taken the lower path, we would have finished up at the edge of Erie Veg plantation, joining on to the old Beery plantation, virtually above Glenmore, the filling station, which used to be obviously a mill itself. And indeed, running down parallel to the other side of the road, which was the Vaish, or originally Ballavaish, which was the Ridge farm. And towards the bottom end of there would be Laurel Bank, which was the original sawmill for the Forestry Board, certainly up until around about the 1980s. And all the timber from all the plantations used to finish up there at one time. And indeed, where we're stood now, we're standing in a middle of a stand of trees, hybrid larch on one side and Sitka spruce on the other. And these were the two main trees that were probably planted in the early 1960s, when an awful lot of the forestry, or at least the new forestry at that time, was done by the Forestry Board. And indeed this is an area which, in 1963, in my first year at the Forestry Board, I spent quite a bit of one summer up here with a sickle and a pointed stick, trimming and weeding the trees themselves. So we're now standing in stuff which has been thinned, and indeed quite a bit of it has been felled, which 40 odd years ago I experienced weeding, as they called it. The place itself, Erie Veg, as with the other area immediately above us, Erie Moor, referred to what the old Manx people call sheilings, which were little settlements. And I think most valleys in the Isle of Man had them. And that is, if you look in J.J. Neen's place names in the Isle of Man, he often refers to places, and associated with them are the sheilings.
Absolutely. And it must be, yes, being a forester, I suppose, is a sure way of marking the passage of years, isn't it? When you look at these trees now, which are, 70, 80 feet tall, yes, maybe taller, indeed. And yes, no doubt it probably feels like yesterday you were up here with your sickle, and they presumably around your ankle somewhere, were they? Or?
Yes, indeed, they've probably been not much more than about 1.5 foot, well, sort of 50 centimetres at the very most. It's very difficult to sort of equate that with what's here now. Because you look at these and you think they've been here for a lifetime,
forever.
Which indeed they have been.
I was going to say, it's getting towards that. But presumably, as you say, when they planted up all these larch and Sitka spruce, they were being put in as cash crops, I assume, were they? They could come down and be turned into wood.
They were indeed. That was the main concern in those days. Was virtually, if you had a square yard of land, you put a Sitka spruce on it. Again, the policies changed greatly in the 1980s. They brought in the afforestation scheme, and along with that there was always the consideration that you planted a percentage of hardwoods. That was very much an important part of that scheme. And I think if I remember rightly, they were talking about 12.5 to 15% of every planting had to be hardwoods. Now, I can probably say it now that I'm not not employed in that. I think wisely, maybe some of the areas that were planted from an afforestation point of view would have been better planted as production areas, and some of the more inaccessible areas which were planted as production would have been better planted as amenity, because a lot of those inaccessible areas are some of the most pretty places in the Isle of Man as well, you know, some of the valleys and steep-sided hills and things like that. So maybe somebody in the future might consider a little bit of a swap, but we shall see.
Well, we never know. Keep our fingers crossed. Okay, onwards. We're going to tack the high road, as they say in Bonnie Scotland. You can hear as we're heading up that there's been a fair amount of rain. Water trickling down there on that track. And distinctly wet underfoot, so good job. One has a stout pair of shoes or boots on for this one, not one for going in your flip-flop. Well, I suppose you could go in your flip-flops as long as you've got tough feet. Not one for your best shoes, though. And we just branched off left onto another track. It looks like the boys have been around here.
Yes, I was talking to the forester earlier on today, and he said they've been doing a bit of work up here, obviously taking some of the timber out and such like, but also they've skimmed the road, which now has left, well, from what we've just experienced, an excellent walking track. We're actually headed out now towards Eiriveg House itself, which again, when I first started in 1962-63, this was a house which was in very good repair and had only recently, along with the immediate area, been taken over by the Forestry Board. Round about that time, there was a lot of what you would call croft areas, really, taken into ownership by the forestry. Croft farming, I think, had sort of met its day of doom, in that they were virtually a non-profitable form of employment, existence virtually, I suppose one could describe it as. And the Forestry Board took the opportunity, if you like, to take into ownership by the Manx government a considerable amount of land area. A lot of that which was subsequently planted up with trees. And just round the corner here, indeed through the trees, we can see the remains of Eiriveg House itself.
There it is, yes, just looming through the trees here. Incredible, you wouldn't expect to see it. You feel you're, well, you could be anywhere, like you know what it's like in the middle of a plantation. Once you're in there, you're really secluded, but we come round here, and yeah, there she is. An old house still in. Well, I wouldn't want to move in necessarily at this time of the year, but it's still standing. Still got a door on.
And indeed, 40 years ago, as I say, it was in good condition. The owner had obviously only recently moved out. When we worked here, this was our main form of shelter in bad weather. And dare I say it, I suppose I spent many an hour in wet and unhospitable conditions in here. The habit again in those days was get the fire going, get the brew on, and indeed get the pack of cards out.
Sounds like a good plan to me.
Sounds good even still, really.
I'd be quite tempted now, but if I'd been more organised, I could have brought a pack of cards and a flask. Although it might not be quite as nice to sit in these days.
hear the second part of this walk at the same time next week.